Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Waseem Daher, the founder and CEO of Pilot, and Gillian O'Brien, a founder in residence at Pilot. Please see show notes for a generous discount offer to Pilot's core services. Waseem, tell us what you do.
Sure. So Pilot provides finance, accounting, and tax prep services for startups and growing businesses. And basically, we run the financial back office for thousands of businesses of various sizes and stages across a number of industries. And the way it works is when you work with Pilot, you're paired with our dedicated team of experts who are all full-time employees of ours that sit in our offices in the US, and they're focused on helping your business succeed. So in short, we're really taking the work of the accounting and the financial back office off your plate.
Got it. And you are the CEO, founder, co-founder?
That's right, CEO and founder.
Got it. Okay. Gillian?
Yeah, thanks for having me here as well. I am a former YC founder turned chief of staff and early employee, turned founder in residence at Pilot. And here I really focus on the YC community and early stage companies, and kind of doing all sorts of initiatives and events and things for them.
Wonderful. Okay. So Waseem, I've read about your background. It is really impressive. So why don't you take us back to when you were an intern, or actually take us back into college? I'm curious if entrepreneurship resonated with you back then.
Sure. So what's interesting, I think, about our journey is that my co-founders, Jeff and Jessica, and I all met in undergrad at MIT, where we all studied computer science together. And in particular, we met in the computer club. And so if MIT were not nerdy enough, it was a very nerdy place, had an already very nerdy place. And so we knew each other socially, and we took classes together. And sort of that was, I think, kind of how the friendship first formed. And the impetus for starting our first company was really that Jeff's master's thesis was this technology that could update software systems without rebooting. I'm sure you've seen that pop up. It's like you must reboot. And so he developed this thing. I don't want to say just as kind of like an intellectual interest project, but sort of, as a research project. And one of the things he had a lot of conviction about was this feels like it has some commercial opportunity. And I think we were all kind of casually or maybe somewhat ignorantly interested in the idea of like, oh, it would be cool to do a startup. So I think when those two things came together, that was really the beginning of the entrepreneurial journey for the three of us.
Got it. All right. So then what happened from that point on?
Sure. So we started that company right out of school and we bootstrapped it, and we all lived together in a scrappy little house in Cambridge and ate a lot of ramen and stuff. We operated the company for about 3 years, and then Oracle acquired it. And we were at Oracle for a year and a day to kind of transition over the tech and then sort of get out of there, to be blunt about it. And we knew, I think, after that experience, that we wanted to get the band back together. We wanted to do something together again. So literally the next day, we all got together in one of our apartments and we said, okay, what's the next company going to be? And we started another company. It was called Zulip. We did it was a group chat tool for businesses. This was a kind of a Slack-like product at a time when Slack was still making a mobile game. We ran that company for about 2 years. Dropbox acquired it. We kind of all came over to Dropbox, where we sort of helped out on the product and engineering side. And then we kind of felt the itch again. We said, okay, we want to get the band back together once more. So in early 2017, kind of same drill, right? We all got together again and said, what is the problem we want to solve this time? And that's kind of how we got to Pilot.
Great. And so you had been an entrepreneur beforehand, so you knew some of the challenges with doing bookkeeping and things like that. So it was near and dear to your heart, right?
Oh, it was very, very much solving a problem that we had ourselves. And in general, I think that's a great kind of source for business ideas. But for us in particular, it was so painful at both of the previous companies that this time we were like, look, we just need to build the thing we wish existed when we were doing our previous ventures.
Got it. And when you worked for those companies that bought you out, was that sort of challenging or different for you?
It's very, very different. I mean, it's an extremely different thing, being the founder and running the company as it is being an employee at a company. And actually, like, we were treated very well by both Oracle and Dropbox, I'd say, especially by Dropbox. And we learned a lot in our time there. So I don't regret it. It's just a very, very different thing. And I think if you're really motivated to start something new, you have to be very kind of like thoughtful about what it is you're hoping to get out of your experience at another company.
Got it. Okay, Jillian, what about you? Talk to us about your background from high school or college onward.
Yeah, so I think my entrepreneurial journey had maybe similar beginnings and different outcomes. I really, I think, was very interested in the whole entrepreneurial thing from the time that I was in college. I did my best to kind of graduate early because I really wanted to just start working. I always had a lot of energy for that. Really was interested in making my own money, trying to kind of do things differently and create like offerings that I thought people would like and value. And so it sort of started when I was in college. The thing that like I was good at back then was social media and helping local businesses with their social media and their communities and doing influencer marketing. So that's what I did during college. And then when I graduated, I ended up going in-house as a manager of social media and influencer marketing at a company called Therese. And I was there for about 8 months and, super energized when I first started the job, but sort of quickly realized or had this sort of like reckoning of, I'm just a new college grad and like this company, and really no company is going to like take me very seriously. I don't have kind of the background for that. And it's going to be this like long journey, sort of climbing this career ladder. And I really want to have more impact now. And so luckily for me, my sister is an engineer. So, she was kind of the technical piece, and she was having sort of similar feelings about her own career. And so we kind of got together and talked about the idea of starting our own company so that we really could just have that opportunity to learn and like, try something for our own and have that experience. So that's how we started. And very similar kind of things to what Waseem is saying about, the beginnings and, living in like a house where there was just a mattress on the floor that we had to kind of like go back and forth sharing, because we were trying to save money for our business and just doing crazy things like that. And we ran our company Cherry for about 2 years. We went through YC, but our very important like seed round raise kind of coincided right with the pandemic happening. And so that, among several other reasons, was why we ended up having to shut down the company. So I remember at YC, one of the partners actually told us, some of you in the room are founders for life. You can never do anything else. And some of you are actually going to be happy being employee number 1 or number 2, or, working at a big company in an impactful role, and that's okay. And so after we ended up shutting down the company, I realized like, I actually am okay with that option too, if I'm at the right place and I'm doing the right thing. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Got it. And then, we saw that big dip in funding during the very first 3 months of the pandemic. But then, strange things happened, right? All that money came back into the market in a robust way, right? I'm just curious if you had started earlier, 6 months earlier, or 6 months, or fundraised 6 months after, do you think things would have been different, or there were other issues that probably would not have made a difference?
I definitely asked myself that. We really kind of did everything we could to try to keep the company going in some way or another. We were talking to a big company about an acquisition as well at a certain point, but then their business kind of became on fire with the conditions of the pandemic. So I do really think that was the timing piece of it was a huge part. But there was this sort of other piece, which was like the naivete of being a first-time founder and just really not understanding, sort of like how to put together the right story and like what investors were looking for from us, and how we needed to kind of come across in order to achieve that result. And so I think that was also quite difficult. I think we had several like objections from investors that we didn't quite know how to handle or didn't have strong answers for. And I think we were also two like very unknown people. And so we did as much as we could to sort of like prove that we were deserving of trust. But it's really hard to do that, I think, when you are a first-time founder, even with the help of YC, and especially when you're kind of in a space that's then being affected by like the current state of the economy. So there were a few different like confluence of things that came together so that we ended up having to make that decision to shut down.
Got it. Now, speaking of the pandemic, Waseem, obviously negatively affected a lot of startups in Gillian's situation, but other companies, did much better in some ways. So talk to us about how the pandemic affected Pilot and your leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, like everyone, we were very concerned because, you see a dip in new sales, you see an increase in cancellations, like all of the sort of, I don't want to say panic reactions exactly, but basically panic reactions that accompany any sort of jarring news, economic or otherwise. And I think the thing that our customers sort of came to appreciate is, well, in some ways, the work that we do is even more valuable when times are uncertain, because it's sort of even more critical that you have a firm grasp on the financial health of the business, how much cash you have, when you're going to run out of money, what different scenarios might look like. And so the nice thing about what we do is that it's actually quite critical to operating your business well. And I think that's even more true when times are tough than when, cash is comparatively more free flowing.
Got it. And you guys obviously have grown a lot. Um, and you also fundraised during the pandemic. So as I said, a lot of money came rushing back into the market,
Sure.
right? And you guys were recipients of a big round early in 2021. Do you want to highlight that? I know I thought Amazon was involved or Jeff Bezos was involved. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. So in 2021, we raised a Series C from Sequoia, Whale Rock, Bezos Expeditions, which is Jeff Bezos's family office, and then a bunch of other folks that we're very, very excited to have on board. And I think ultimately it's a testament to what we've built. Like we've built a service that our customers really like, that they tell their friends about, that has been growing at a really healthy clip, and uh, that in my view sort of represents the future of what this is going to look like. Like I think the thing that's interesting about what we do, again, we talked about kind of when you work with us, you're paired with your dedicated team, a team of experts on our side. But under the hood, what we're doing is we're building software internally that team uses to do the work more accurately, more reliably, more efficiently. It's, if you like, it's sort of like the Iron Man suit that we're building for our internal accounting team. And if you look at sort of the nature of the work required here, what you really want is the computer doing the things that the computer is going to do well. In other words, the super mechanical error prone stuff. And you want the person doing the things that the person is going to do well, like the smart, judgment oriented, kind of like context dependent, like advice pieces of the puzzle. And today, sort of everywhere else in the world, this stuff is done entirely by hand. Like someone is just clicking around a ton in QuickBooks. And the consequence of that is it tends to be less accurate. And then also they sort of don't have the time and energy and bandwidth to spend on the stuff that's actually kind of important or useful to you. So we had and we have really strong conviction that like this is what the future is going to look like. And I think that same conviction wasn't is reflected by our investors.
Right. And as I see it, it is a little disruptive, right? Would you say it's obviously disrupting bookkeepers,
Sure.
right? Maybe accountants to some extent, but can you talk to us more about the disruption, in the marketplace?
I mean, here's how I see it, which is if you look at how big companies run their back offices, financial back office or kind of more broadly, you have entire teams of like smart, talented folks managing those functions. You have a whole like strategic finance team that's doing budgeting and forecasting, and they're using their MBA brains to figure out, what the best decisions are for your company. And the reality of what this is like for the average small startup or maybe small or medium business is that they don't have access to those capabilities or to those resources. So in a way, we view our mission as, I don't want to say democratizing exactly, but bringing that capability to the average business. Can we give you superpowers that you would have been able to get if you had one of these teams kind of at your back? And the net effect of that, if we're doing our jobs well, is ultimately we should be making your business more successful because we help you make smarter decisions about how to operate it. So that's really, I think, the opportunity from my perspective is well, imagine if we could make every business even 5% more effective or more successful. Like that would have huge impact. And so that's the thing that kind of gets us excited.
And Gillian, have you seen that in your role at the firm?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, pilot is one of those things that early stage founders, they really do need to kind of get going with very quickly. I do remember that when I was kind of working on my company with my sister, we had made the mistake of trying to do that on our own. One of several things that we thought that was supposed to fall within like our responsibilities that ended up just being a very big waste of time. We talk a lot at Pilot about specifically with the founder audience, this idea that like there are things that are worth the founder's time, and there are things that are just not, worth DIYing or not worth trying to figure out how to do from scratch when there's people who know how to do that much better than you ever can. And being a founder who is really good at bookkeeping isn't going to be the X factor. So that I think that idea is very disruptive. I think there are several things that founders have to kind of come to terms with is not going to be the thing that they do really well at their company, and Pilot is one of those things.
So when you see the marketplace, what percentage of the business is startups and small businesses and growth companies? Do you have that? Can you give us some sense for where the focus is?
Yeah, it's probably like 65%-ish technology startups of various sizes and stages. And then a quite broad basket. In other words, there are a bunch of e-commerce companies, there are consulting firms, there's it's a quite eclectic customer base. And I think the reason that's the case is because everyone has this problem. It's not unique to a particular size or stage or industry. Like if you have a business, you have to deal with its accounting and tax prep and all that stuff.
Right. And so, this in some ways, as I think about, we always talk about the cost of starting a business is so much lower these days than 20 years, right? Like 100. And if they use services like yours as well, the savings in time and agony and frustration are really dramatic, right? And the cost is lower too. But the time and mind share, I think, as I see it, is much less.
Well, my hope is we do even better than that. Like, absolutely, yes, we should be taking this work off your plate. But ideally, we're also helping you operate the business in a smarter way. So I think the table stakes thing we should do is, yes, we're going to take care of this for you. We're going to do it well because we're experts at it. So you shouldn't need to worry about it. But I think the place where it goes from good to great is, well, look, we also do this, with literally thousands of other companies. Can we be a resource to you? Are there questions we can answer for you? Are there things we can do to help you operate your business in a more intelligent way? And we get tons of these kinds of questions from our customers all the time. Sometimes they're as simple as, look, what system should I use for XYZ? Or how should I think about setting up in a new state? Like there's a whole bunch of kind of miscellaneous questions related to kind of how to govern the business. And I think that's the cherry on top with us, which is that we do it for so many people that actually we have like quite well-informed views on a lot of these topics.
Right. And we'll speak to that a bit more. I mean, you have all this data, right? You can actually see how companies are doing and maybe be a leading, I don't know what you plan to do with that data at some point, but there could be leading indicators. Comparing your basket against the normal basket, how much better your company's, number one. But number two, you could maybe have a sort of the pulse of the market. How's that sort of factor into your vision?
Yeah, I would say that this sort of gets even more exciting as the customer base grows. So first of all, the great thing about our business is that our obligation is first and foremost to our customers. And there's a very simple economic transaction that causes that to occur, which is people pay us for our service. And so our obligation is always, how do we do right by and how do we support Pilot's customers? And I think one of the exciting things we might be able to do as the company grows, in other words, if we were serving hundreds of thousands of companies rather than thousands of companies, imagine if I came to you and I said, hey, we know about 1,500 companies in your geographic area, in your industry, and relative to your peers, you're actually spending way too much on category X. And here's what you can do to run that more efficiently. Or, we know November is going to be really slow from a cash flow perspective. Here's what you could do now to get ahead of that. So I think especially as we grow, there are insights that we will be able to provide folks that are literally impossible to get anywhere else.
Right. Well, let's talk about that vision. How big do you want to get? You're a unicorn now, at least according to that article which I read after the last funding round. What's your vision for the future?
Yeah, look, I mean, the reason we started this company is because of pain we had in our previous ventures. And that pain, I think, is felt by any founder or business owner. In other words, you start your company because there's some product or service you're excited to get in the world. And as you go by your business, I think what you find is, yes, you spend time on that, but there's all of this back office stuff that you need to deal with. And the back office stuff is challenging because one, it's really important. It's really critical that you do it well. Like it matters. And two, kind of to Jillian's point, it's not your area of expertise and it's generally not your area of highest leverage. And so the mandate or the mission for Pilot is Pilot should be your trusted partner that runs your back office for you so you can focus on your business. And when we do that, we should be equipping you with these superpowers that you can't get anywhere else. And so all this to say, like the ambition for Pilot is, I want to do the accounting for every business in the United States. But even that is not enough. In other words, if you talk to our customers, they frequently come to us and they say, listen, you're doing a great job with the accounting. Can you help me with legal or HR or business insurance or small business lending or payroll or any of that stuff? And I think the aspiration in a very real way is if we could really do this super well for every business out there, first of all, imagine how much friction that would reduce, both for to start and to operate a company. And then also imagine how much more productive or effective these companies could be. And the analogy here is maybe a little bit of a technical one, but if you look at sort of what happened with cloud computing or maybe something like AWS specifically, like in our very first company, we had some servers and they were literally in a data center somewhere and we periodically had to visit them to replace the hard drives when they died or when they need to be rebooted or whatever it is. And Amazon came along and said, look, when we run this infrastructure for you, we can do it better. We can do it at a broader scale. And the consequence of that is we can give you capabilities that you can't get anywhere else. Like, oh, you want 10,000 more servers? Just click here. Like that was impossible under the old way. And our aspiration is to say, well, can we do that same thing, except rather than running your technical infrastructure, what if we ran your company's infrastructure? What if we made it super seamless for us to take all of this work off your plate? And that when we do, you actually get outcomes and results that would not be possible if you did it the sort of legacy way.
Right. That makes so much sense. And it's so compelling as you articulate that vision for bigger companies, right? Who have already all these customers to sort of add this feature, right? So that's going to be really interesting to watch, right? The opportunities obviously will be there going forward. So Gillian, let's move over to you. You came into this company as a founder in residence, and that is a relatively new term. We always hear entrepreneur in residence for ages, but founder in residence is really interesting. So can you speak more about that role and how you came about it and how that differs maybe from others?
Yeah, it's really fun. It's a really fun title to carry. And I think when we were talking about the role, I think that title should serve a purpose and have a function. And so we were talking about, several different titles for the role. And I think we kind of settled on this founder in residence because it would help to accomplish, really kind of relating to founders and sort of being like one of them and getting them to, trust the information that's coming from me and remind them that, I was in their shoes very, not very long ago. And so that really helps. I think that the title actually serves that kind of purpose and that function. So yeah, I mean, when I meet other founders and they hear about what I do, we, talk a little bit more about my entrepreneurial journey. They get acquainted with, what I do here and my background. And then there is kind of this camaraderie that helps, I think, them trust me a little bit more when I am, giving them advice or, bringing them into a sales process or what have you.
Got it. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because the market, a big part of the company's market is founders. So to
Yes.
have a founder that could resonate with them and relate to them makes a lot of sense. And
Right.
how do you view it, Waseem?
Yeah. The other thing I'd add here is I think like there is something, not to maybe put the founder persona on a pedestal, but I think there is a certain amount of like energy and ownership and engagement and sort of just like roll up your sleeves and get it done attribute that comes with someone who has been a founder before, because they've been in the trenches, they've had to do it all because they sort of didn't have that support structure, is one thing that I think was really critical in thinking about how we kind of scoped and defined the role. And the second is, and listen, Gillian has to speak to Gillian's future career path, but my sense is that folks who have been founders in the past, they frequently feel the itch in the future. And while I would love for Gillian to be a pilot, as long as Gillian would like to be a pilot, I wouldn't be surprised either if a new startup is at some point potentially in her future. And I think as we've thought about the orientation of the role, I mean, that's why we think of it as founder in residence, because as you think about Gillian, or as I think about Gillian, like the expertise she brings to pilot is her experience as a startup founder. And yes, she resides in the company that is pilot, but I think that's kind of how we think about the role.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I wonder if you've thought about expanding that role nationwide. I don't know what your plans are nationwide, but I mean, I can imagine founders and residents in, every state or hub
Sure.
as a way to sort of grow the business more effectively. I don't know, but you tell me.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I think that's definitely something to consider for sure.
And Jillian, how has your experience been so far? Your boss is here, so you're obviously going to say something. But are you starting to get the itch a little bit, or especially if you're talking to founders all day long?
I think I've loved my experience at Pilot so far, and I would say that if Waseem was here or not. But yeah, I mean, this is really only the like second or third company that I've worked at, and so in that way, like just observing the way that the company operates and how like the leadership kind of thinks or like presents things, just getting another data point is so helpful. And it's also the biggest company that I've worked at. I think Pilot is a little over 400 people now. So, putting myself in that experience is also very valuable, seeing how things operate at scale. Definitely. I mean, I am always interested in, hearing from other founders. Because I do have that title, it does kind of invite that conversation where people say like, hey, we're looking for a third founder, or we might want to be looking for this at a certain point. And so that's really fun. Like, I love hearing about new businesses and kind of being on the bleeding edge and seeing all like the new YC companies. And they often are like doing things that are very crazy in a way that's exciting. But I would say I do feel like I still have a lot more to learn here. And there's a lot further to go. So the itch is there, but it's sort of like manageable right now, kind of like in the back of my mind. And I'm sure that it'll kind of like come up to the forefront at some point. And yeah, I love that the title kind of invites that conversation from founders.
And just to kind of jump on that a little bit, I think so. Jeff, Jessica, and I were at Dropbox for about 2 years. In my case, like a little bit over 2 years. And to kind of Jillian's point, I found that to be actually quite formative and quite instructive, because I got to see a snapshot while I was there at Dropbox. I joined at about 600 employees, and when I left, it was about 1,200. And it was really interesting to see a company at that stage, pre-IPO, what was going well, what was going poorly, like what to do more of, what to do less of. And I think it definitely had a very direct impact on how we have run, how we choose to run this company.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. Everything looks great now with the company. It's on a great trajectory, but are there challenges ahead? I mean, we're probably going into a slowdown. Is that an opportunity or a challenge for the company, as I guess other companies look to sort of be more efficient, lower costs? How do you see sort of the landscape and what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the macro environment is going to be challenging for lots of folks, but I think what it will force to happen is that companies will have to be really laser focused on their customers and what their customers need. Like in better times, you might be able to get away with selling a nice to have. In tough times, you have to be solving a need to have problem. Now, the good news about what we do is we do solve a need to have problem, but I think it's a healthy reminder to really focus on the fundamentals of the business, which is, are you delivering a service that your customers love at a price point that makes sense for them and you? And are you kind of investing in the flywheels that will drive growth for the business going forward?
Got it. And what about you, Julian? Do you see anything differently?
I think Waseem said it very well. It's, my company and sort of the reason that we ended up shutting down was because we were selling a nice to have. And that was one of the things that we ultimately realized. So again, like from that learning perspective, it is really interesting to see how Pilot is moving through all of these kind of fluctuations in the market, and kind of what is and isn't affected by those fluctuations. And there is a huge difference in being a business that is selling a critical product.
Got it. And what about trends, into the future in this space? Are you seeing, obviously, it's a wide open space. You guys are doing an amazing job, but is there any trends that are worth noting?
I mean, one of the things that I think about for any business is that I think any business should have a why now. In other words, what has changed about the world that has enabled this particular business to exist? And not to, take away our credit or whatever, the idea of, hey, maybe we should have a firm that does your accounting for you in a scaled tech-enabled way, that is not itself a novel idea. Like I'm sure people had that idea in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and so on and so forth. So why now? Like what trends are uniquely enabling this to exist at this point in time? And why doesn't this company already exist? And I think the trends that enable Pilot and that actually probably enable lots of companies in the fintech space are sort of twofold. The first is that all of this stuff is kind of electronic and in the cloud now. Like at our very first company, our bank statement literally arrived in the mail in an envelope. And I suppose you maybe could log into the website and get it, but that was not a sure thing, certainly. Fast forward to the present, you have all these companies, you have Stripe and you have Plaid and you have Rippling and Gusto and Brex and Ramp. And there's just the ecosystem of all of these kind of like very modern cloud-based tech-enabled companies that have APIs means that you can get the input data for doing your accounting electronically. Whereas if we were trying to build this business in the past, you'd first have to build all the plumbing to allow you to get the data electronically in the first place so that you could then manipulate it and kind of make the accounting records. So that's, I think, macro trend number one that has enabled the existence of Pilot. And the second, I think, is a change in consumer behavior, a change actually that's been accelerated by the pandemic in particular, which is that, 10, 20 years ago, you might have preferred to take your shoebox of receipts and walk down the street to go visit your local accountant. Now, I think buying behavior has changed pretty dramatically. Not only do people not prefer that, they probably actively don't want that. They probably want to be able to transact this stuff from the comfort of their home and their pajamas, on Saturday evening or whatever. And so that's the other thing. I think the confluence of those two things is sort of the why now for Pilot specifically. And I think both of those will have broad-based impact on all kinds of startups going forward.
Right. And what about talent? Are you challenged finding talent like most other companies are?
I think every company struggles to find good talent. So absolutely, we're no exception there.
Got it. What about guidance for entrepreneurs? There's a lot of entrepreneurs who listen in, and you're both entrepreneurs. Anything in general that you give to entrepreneurs when you meet them?
I would say for me, it's you have to be laser focused on the customer and making sure you're solving a top 3 hair on fire problem for your customer. And I think this is a very easy trap to fall into, because what I find is that most people are solving a real problem, which is why they have conviction in it, but it may be problem 15 or problem 20. And the reality of problem 20 is problem 20 is very deceiving, because when you talk to people and you ask them, do you have this problem? And they'll say, yes, I do. That does resonate with me. It would be really nice if someone solved this thing for me. But the problem is, by virtue of it being problem number 20, they're never going to get to it. Like I only have time to deal with problems 1 and 2. And on a good day, I get to problem 3. So I encourage folks to say, well, listen, you really need to orient around a hair on fire problem for a specific customer who is willing to basically pay you right now for it. And if you can't find that person and you can't find that problem, I would encourage you to look for something where there's more market pull.
Got it. Gillian?
Yeah, I think my advice is will probably resonate a little bit more with female founders or any young founders, people who maybe have some imposter syndrome. But my advice would actually be to sort of tune out the advice as much as possible. There's a lot of it, and I think my mistake being a first-time founder was believing that everyone else knew how to run my business better than me. And I, need to research and take a very academic and studious approach to everything and, see how other people did it before and follow in their footsteps. And there's certainly a lot of value to that on certain parts of the business. But I think something that my sister, my co-founder and I learned was we were sort of book smart and street dumb as it related to kind of running our business. And when we finally kind of got rid of all the advice and asked ourselves what we thought about what we needed to do is when we actually saw the most growth. So there is definitely some value in also just kind of listening to your intuition and trying to remove as much advice as possible. Yeah.
I strongly agree with that, actually. I think that in general, the advice is worth what you're paying for it, which typically is nothing. And that there are best practices, and yes, you should be aware of them and you should follow them, but your business is unique and it is probably not like every other business that existed in the world. And so first of all, if you don't know it best, that's actually a problem. And there's nothing that suggests necessarily that the playbook that worked for company XYZ is even applicable to your company.
Yeah, that's a great point. Great point. Now, what about for entrepreneurs who are raising money in today's environment? What tips do you have for them?
Well, this is a little glib, but I would say don't if you can avoid it. And in particular, I'm joking here, but what I really do kind of want to drive home is there is no right way to fund a company. And I think there is a good deal of oh, my company isn't real if I can't raise money, or if I can't raise money from person XYZ or from firm ABC. And from my perspective, none of that matters. I think what really matters is, again, how do you build a product that your customers love? And how do you finance that in a way that works for your business? And I think now more than ever, because the funding market is so tight, if there are alternative or creative things you can do to get the cash into your business that is not maybe a traditional fundraising process, I think it's worth a second look.
Got it. Gillian?
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. There's really the best position that you can be in when you fundraise. I think everyone knows this is when you don't desperately need the money, and investors don't pick up on the fact that you either need the money or closing the business, which is kind of the situation that I was in when I was fundraising, and it was not fun. So it's definitely much better if you can, focus as much on your customers and, getting to a point of breaking even or profitability, or just kind of being in a self-sustained position.
Got it. Well, this has been a great conversation, Waseem and Gillian. Thanks for doing this. We usually end with a poem or a saying. So let me start with you, Gillian. What do you have for us?
Yeah, when I saw that you asked this in the email, it's funny because I'm helping my grandma make her own website, and she writes a lot of poems. So I'm going to read one of her poems in a short version. She calls this poem "My Personal Goal." I rush around and do my best to cover every mile. Sitting around and vegetating has never been my style. The world has many problems and we can't solve them all, but there are situations where we can start off small. Each of us has separate skills that can easily be revived and used in many ways to help the world thrive. So when the time arrives one day to take my final rest, I would like to be remembered as one who did her best.
Yay, that was lovely. Thank you for that. Waseem?
So mine is more of a quote than a poem. I thought about kind of the prompt that you gave. And of course, I first wanted to turn to kind of a poet from our shared heritage, Khalil Gibran. But I decided against, and I want to close with actually a quote from sort of near the end of the movie of Casablanca, and in particular, sort of kind of near the end. I'm not going to spoil the movie for folks, though it has been out for I don't know, like almost 100 years at this point. So if you haven't seen it, you probably shouldn't sleep on it. Um, but one of the final scenes, Rick says, "It doesn't take much to see that the problems of three little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world." And I think that it's important context for me in the context of kind of thinking about work-life balance in particular, which is like it's very tempting, I think, as a founder to have your startup consume your whole identity and to inextricably kind of tie your own sense of purpose and well-being to the startup. And I think it's important to step back and remember, which is like, look, yes, it's important. Of course, you want it to succeed, but in the grand scheme of things, like this is all pretty low stakes.
That was great. Thank you for sharing that, Waseem. And I want to thank both of you for joining me for this conversation. It's been really a lot of fun and very informative. So let's stay in touch. Good luck with the growth of the company, and hope to catch up in a year or two or three and see where you're at.
Sounds great. Jim, thanks for having us on the show. And then actually for your listeners, thanks for tuning in. We actually have a little promo for them. If you go to pilot.com/a-few-things, that's one word, just a few things, we have a 20% discount off Pilot Core for the first 6 months. So I hope that's useful to folks in the audience.
Absolutely. Thank you for offering that, Waseem. We really appreciate that. And thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.